Hey everyone, you're listening to another episode of A Lifelong Learner. Today we are joined by a special guest, Rebecca Block, who is an author, teen advocate, teen expert, and an educator. We dive into a range of topics and question the education system currently, both in Australia and in the States at the moment, and really dive into why we're not teaching people and young adults what really matters in the world. So, hope you enjoy. Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Lifelong Learner. And today I'm joined by a special guest all the way from the States, Rebecca Block. Welcome, Rebecca.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, so Rebecca, I'm going to give you I'm going to rattle off your rap sheet, and I probably think I'm going to miss a few things here. But please feel free to, fill in the blanks. So, Rebecca, you're an author, you're a teen advocate, I would say, and somewhat an expert in the minds of teens and helping people interpret teens. You're also vice president of SpringBoard, and you work with Fair Education as well. And from what I've learned, Fair Education both helps schools and families, kind of bridging that gap and the conduit between that. And tell me more about SpringBoard, exactly what SpringBoard does, and please feel free to fill in the gaps of what I may have missed out.
Yeah, I have a range of things that I've done and do, so it's totally understandable to miss a few of them. So I'm the AVP of Innovation and Improvement at Springboard, although I'm actually in the midst of transitioning out of that role and into other opportunities. So by the time this episode goes live, that will no longer be true. But Springboard is a lovely, amazing organization that works with elementary schools across the country, bringing literacy programs to the communities so that it brings families, educators, and kids together to set and achieve reading goals and get students to reading on grade level before fourth grade.
Okay, great, awesome, awesome.
Great.
And what are you moving into?
Uh, I'm moving into a range of things right now. So that would be such a long answer. I know we were talking before recording about how one of my coaches has encouraged me to get better at the short answer, and that remains a growth opportunity for me. So I'm going to refrain from going into all the super long details, but one of them you mentioned, FAIR. So that's an organization that I co-founded with some colleagues a few years ago as a thing that we were doing exclusively on sort of the evenings and weekends, because I wasn't having enough fun doing one education-focused job. I wanted to do two education-focused jobs. So we have been working with high schools and families, and increasingly one of the things that I'm doing now is working especially with more families and educational leaders who are really invested in how do we understand how to make school more meaningful and motivating? What does it look like to collaborate around that? How can I help, whether it's at the level of a parent wanting to help and support their own child, or at the level of a superintendent wanting to do something with their district, or somewhere in between.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great. And so let's go back a step. What pulled you into the field of education, of youth, all that? What was the give me the background story of what led to where you are today?
Yeah, that uh, there's a lot. I first got into working with young people actually as soon as I finished my undergraduate degree. I got a bachelor's in the humanities, which it turns out is not immediately useful for a whole lot of jobs. But one of the things that it meant that I was good at was communicating, learning, and helping other people learn. And so I started informally as a tutor, basically to college students and high school students, helping them with their communication, their writing, their studying, things like that. As I did that, and then also tried a range of other jobs that one can do as an entry level, person in their 20s with a bachelor in humanities, I realized I really need to go back to school. This is not working. Uh, and so when I was looking at my options of what I could do for graduate school, I was kind of choosing between, do I become a therapist or do I become a professor? Those were kind of the two directions I was considering, because I love, basically, as I think of it, I love helping people who want the help, whether that's helping people learn something they want to learn, whether it's helping people resolve and get insight on something they want insight on. But it turned out that the graduate program in counseling required a bunch of prereqs that I didn't have with my bachelor's degree in the humanities. And that meanwhile, I could get a fellowship by doing the graduate program to become a professor. So I did that one. and went on to open a writing center at an open access college and teach writing courses after I finished my PhD, and just really loved working with students um, and helping them really engage in relevant learning. My approach to the instruction of writing is the same as my approach to any instruction, which is how do you find the thing that you're actually interested in learning and then make this meaningful for you in relation to your interest, right? So I ran my writing classes like, what is it you want to do? What are you interested in? What are causes you care about? Let's find the genres to write in that are relevant there instead of me telling you to just write academic essays. And what I saw was that a lot of my students would just kind of give me this blank stare, like, what? Can you just tell me what to do to get a good grade? I don't understand. And as I saw that happen over and over again, I was like, we've got to do more. And I don't think this just applies to the US, but you can speak to Australia, right? We've got to do more to build in the before post-secondary experience, in that K-12 experience, the chance to make meaningful choices and really engage with learning. And so I started working with nonprofits that were working in the K-12 space to help them design and evaluate and improve their programs to see how they could kind of optimize impact to help young people. And then started this book a few years ago, sparked by one of the educators that I was working with who had a student that was asking, like, can you help? Wait, do you use expletives in your show or not? Because I won't say the full thing that what the student said if you guys don't use expletives.
100%. Go for it. Yeah, we're the
Okay.
part, so go for it. Yep.
All right. Great. I promise that I'll wrap it up. Told you I wasn't good at keeping it short. So she had asked the teacher that she was working with, can you help me give a shit about high school? I want to, but I just don't know how. And that teacher came to me and another one of my colleagues to say, how do I help her? I can teach executive functioning. I can teach study skills. I can teach all these other things, but I don't know how to teach her to care about school. And I thought, I can point you to all the research about that, but all that research is written by researchers for researchers. There's not a lot that is actually talking with young people about what helps them care about high school, right? What's their experience that's allowed them to care, to feel engaged, to feel motivated. And so that's what kicked off the whole project that led to my book that came out this summer, is interviewing young people all over the country about what made for the most and least engaging learning experiences for them.
Yeah, great. And so I love the title. Love the title of the book's good. And so what would you say some and if not some of if your biggest learnings from the research of the book? Can you help me give a shit? Right. Like I think I could imagine there was a lot of research, a lot of conversations, a lot of again conversations with young people. What was your biggest learning from it?
Yeah. There were a few. One of them I like to joke with other parents that I know because in addition to being a nerd and an educator and a researcher, I'm also a parent. Uh, is that we have this tendency to think of teens like they're almost like a separate species. Like, oh, so, like so mysterious, so different. This, alien moves into your house and then hopefully moves out 8 years later, right? But they're not. It turns out that what motivates them and what makes something meaningful and engaging for them is the same as what makes something motivating, meaningful, and engaging for us, right? And when you listen to their stories, that becomes really obvious as soon as you start to map it to comparisons from work experiences, right? So, for instance, most of us have gone through mandatory work trainings at various points, something that we were told we had to do. It was obligatory. It was not designed to be engaging because nobody cares whether or not it is right. Here's just this thing you have to do. And none of us, that I know at least, roll into those experiences being like, yeah, I'm going to rock this. I'm so jazzed to take this mandatory reporter training or this, obligatory, right? Like we don't come in jazzed and excited about that because we had no choice. We have no meaningful connections with anybody that's doing anything about it. We don't feel particularly like the abilities that we're learning there are relevant or matter to anything else that we're doing in the rest of our day. But that usually makes up like 5% of what we're asked to do. And it makes up anywhere from 50 to 80% of what high school students are asked to do. Right. And so when you stop to think about that, you're like, well, yeah, they're not a separate species. They're hitting a time period where their brain is telling them, figure out who you are and make connections in order to do that. And then put in an environment that's mostly saying, be quiet, sit down, shut up. You have nothing of value to say yet until you're an adult. You just need to listen to this thing and regurgitate information that I tell you, and then you can go use it later. P.S. By the way, we'll tell you that it's relevant, but it's not actually probably going to be very relevant for your future, maybe like 10% of it, right? Like it's really obvious once you stop to think about it. So that was one of the things that I think struck me the most is like, this shouldn't be shocking. And yet it is. It is that we walk around going, why? Why are teens not more excited and like want to learn and motivated in school?
Why do you think society labels teens that way?
Oh, gosh. I think some of it is just we've gotten in a habit, right? Like we've just gotten in a habit of acting like apathy is just part of adolescence,
Mm.
instead of seeing it as like a really natural and obvious defense mechanism when you are put in a situation where you want to have agency and you are given none, right? And so when you're put in that kind of situation, you kind of have two choices, right? One is to check out, to become apathetic. Like you don't have any choices here. Well, whatever, I don't care anyways, right? Like that's a really good defense mechanism. The other one, the flip side that you see to me is actually coming from the same coin, which is these hyper overachiever students. I don't know if this is an issue in Australia the way it is in the US, but there's this subset of students that are these like super overachievers, and they're working basically 90-hour weeks between classes and extracurriculars and homework and like doing all the most intense things to try to get into the most competitive colleges and universities, try to get in the most competitive jobs, and then crashing and burning in their mid 20s because they're totally burned out because they've been like pre-professionalized their entire period of brain and adolescent, identity development. And I think both of those are natural reactions to having the main thing you're being asked to do be something that you have almost no significant influence and control over, right? So either you can stack a bunch of other things on top of it that you opted into, or you can say, I'm checked out from the whole thing and I'll re-engage at the point that I actually get some meaningful choices and connections and abilities that feel relevant to me.
Yeah. And just when you made those two comparisons there, like just made me think that we don't do that with adults, right? Adults get that way, right? Where they're in a job that's not engaging, they don't like it, and they feel like they don't have no choice, and they just go in, they clock in, they do their 9 to 5, right? Or they're 8 to 5, 8 to 6. They clock in, clock out, and that is it. And you when you ask them, and I definitely have friends in this place where you go, "Oh, how's work? Oh, work's work, Janesh," and you're like, but that doesn't get as much attention as teens.
Yeah.
Um, I'm curious. Do you know why? What do you think? And that just kind of came to me now, where we go. You know what? The same behaviors happen in adults all the time, but
Yeah.
doesn't get labeled. There's not like a quote unquote problem. They're like, oh no, that's just
Yeah.
adulting. You're like, well, I don't know about that.
Yeah. I think that's such a great question. I don't know, but I certainly have hypotheses, right? One of my hypotheses would be that during that time period of really crucial identity development that's happening from age 10 to 25, basically, but really heightened in the middle of that time period. It's part of your job, right? It's part of what your brain is driving you to do is to explore and experiment and change and try lots of different things in order to discern who you are. Once you're past the age of 25, the drive to explore, experiment, et cetera, goes down, right? Like our frontal lobe is more fully formed. We believe that we know who we are. And unless we have some kind of post-traumatic growth like trigger,
Mm-hmm.
we tend to be a little bit more plug and play from my read of the literature, which means that when you look at an adult who's doing that, it's kind of more like, well, there's not a whole lot of rebellion mixed in with it, right? Whereas I think that we tend to look at teens who are doing that, and they're more likely, if they're going, oh, this is BS, to react in a more visible way, right? Not to just keep being agreeable cogs in the machine and keep showing up and doing the thing and then going home and being like, whatever is whatever, right? It's like, yeah, I'm apathetic about school, but I'm pissed off about it too. So I'm going to act out in some way that triggers concerns. I think the other thing is once somebody is working, nobody's wandering around worried about their failure to launch, right? Like, well, you're paying your bills. So if you want to be miserable, then go right ahead. right? Whereas with teens, we tend to be more worried like, uh-oh, if you're not engaging meaningfully in school and doing really well, does that mean you're not going to get a job? Does that mean you're not going to be able to pay your bills? Is that going to mean that you're staying in my house your entire life and I have this massive financial burden that I can't afford? And panic, 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 right? So like there's that whole parental panic thing that sets in. Of like, oh my God, I have to make sure they care because somehow that's going to predict whether or not they're able to work and succeed and not always be living in my basement.
Yeah. Yeah. That's interesting. And what, like, it's interesting where I think, and off air we were saying that, um, like, well, the other part of what I do is at an adventure camp, and we deal with a lot of young people that come through our front gates, and we see them for a short period of time, and we ask the school teachers at the start, is there anyone we need to be concerned about? Just give us and they might give us one name. There's some schools might give us a whole list and go, here's the sheet, and you're like, okay, and it's interesting that they at the end those students are a non-issue, right?
Yeah.
Definitely for our staff, for our team, and it's it's quite a reason why I definitely got out of the teaching system in Australia, and I don't know what it's like in. I've never taught at a school in the States, where in Australia there's a lot of bureaucracy, and my opinion of it is that they say disengaged. They talk about disengaged students, and I've got both. I got two kids, one in high school, one in elementary at the moment. They go, oh, there's the school. Some kids are problem behavior, and I'm like, I say it doesn't get received well, but I'm like, well, have we looked at the teachers? Have we looked at like giving them the skills to get these students engaged, right? Like and my view is that I don't think schools it's like archaic, a bit of the system, and they don't cater for everyone. They can, yeah, it might take a little bit of nous and a little bit of work. I don't think it's as much. But why what do you think of the education system at the moment? Like the
Yeah.
pre
Yeah.
pre college system? I'm curious to kind of to unpack that and hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, one, I'm not surprised for you to hear what you're describing happens with your program outside of school. A lot of what students talked about as their most engaging learning experiences were in extracurricular programs, like what you're describing. And often what they were bringing up are ones that were longer running than what you're describing, because that is what made the most meaningful difference, that they got to continue to engage in, youth leadership programs and other things like that. So they named a bunch of different ones that work well in the States. I'm sure that there's also a bunch of ones that are really great for that in Australia. And that would like give them the chance to feel that sense of, I'm getting to make meaningful choices. I'm getting to learn something that's relevant. I'm getting to connect with people first and foremost, right? And that's like the biggest thing that comes out over and over again, is if they feel connected to their teacher, to your point, if they feel connected to at least one other student in a given classroom,
Mm.
the likelihood that they are engaged in learning the material of that classroom goes way up,
Mhm.
way more so than if it's about a subject matter they're particularly interested in, right? And it's not actually that complicated when you think about it, because even if you love a subject, if you don't feel connected to the person that's teaching it and there's no other peers for you to connect with about that subject, you have to like be the one that's bringing all the energy in every day to keep being jazzed about that. Whereas when there's energy coming from connecting with people and you're feeling excited, you've got all that social energy component, you're not having to like bring it all yourself. So I think you're right, in the US as well, that it has a lot to do with the system, but I don't know that I would put so much on the teacher's doorstep as I would on the structural
Mhm.
thing, right? Like teachers are jammed, and you can tell me if this is the case in Australia, but teachers here are jammed with 15 million requirements, right? You've got to teach towards this test, you're measured on these things, you have to cover these standards. You have to get all this training and expertise, and then we just completely disregard it. And we tell you what curriculum to teach and how to teach it and how long and what to cover and when you cover it and what, and like they are given so little. It does not surprise me at all that teachers also in the US are leaving the profession in droves and feel significantly burnt out and demotivated, because the same things, the things I talk about as the ABCDs of motivation, apply to their role just as much as it applies to the student role, which is they aren't given the chance to make meaningful choices, they don't get to have much belonging and connection. Their abilities that they spent so long developing are not the abilities that actually help them succeed in the system. And what's prioritized and treasured is your ability to get test scores to a certain place consistently over and over again. And if that's what you're focused on as a teacher, that does not motivate you to put effort into connecting with students, building relationships, and giving them meaningful choice about what they're engaging with and how they're engaging with it, because you're panicked, right? You're like, I got to make sure that we cover 3.1, 3.2, 3.3 within the, standards, or else they're going to bomb on this test and I'm going to lose my job or have my salary, reduced, or the school will get defunded if we do it on a group level, right? Like there's all that kind of pressure that just makes it where the focus is on how much content we cover, which isn't in itself dumb. But I'm going to stop. I'm trying to get shorter. I'm trying to get shorter.
That's good. It's good. Like, well, I'm curious to go why. Like you said, you summed it up really well at the start. Like it's not rocket science, right? Like the connection part or building rapport doesn't. It's there should be step one.
Yeah.
And it's not really there unless it sometimes, again, there's some great educators that do make it intentional, and then some that it happens innately for certain students. And and so and just flipping it on terms of say the system, and I think both Australia and US are very similar with this. They Why do you think they test for scores? And when we all know in reality, in your 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, later, it doesn't really matter. Like,
Yeah.
really. Like, and I've worked with a couple of clients and we're working on this one question. I've gone, just keep asking a question of what really matters. What really matters. And it doesn't really matter. What like again, I don't know. I've asked this question a lot and I don't know the answer. And I think I'm always curious to hear people's thoughts on it. Why do you think we do it? There's a lot of intelligent people around in education departments around the world, and there's no light. I feel like there hasn't been a light bulb moment to go, oh,
Yeah.
we probably need to switch something up here because this is not working.
Well, and this is the thing. One of my good friends and colleagues went to get her PhD from one of the top Penn. It's an Ivy League school here in the US, specifically focused in education because she'd been a high school educator and she was like, why is this so hard? Like I'm gonna go to graduate school and I'm gonna figure this out. I'm gonna figure out what we do so that I can then bring it back. And she described being so phenomenally disappointed when she got into graduate school and realized that we've known, like education researchers have known for like 100 years what it is that makes for an engaging and effective learning environment, right? So it's not a lack of knowledge. It's not a lack of knowledge or a lack of research about what to do. So then if it's not that, right, then you have to sort of go, okay, well, what's left?
Mm.
I personally think that one of the big influencing factors is testing lobbies. I don't know again how it is in Australia, but in the States, the big centralized standardized testing agencies put massive amounts of money into lobbying
Mhm.
on behalf of basically the rigor and quality. And this is how you're going to measure and have standards and be confident that you are getting results, right? And into like studies that, correlate the results on the SATs or the ACTs or the blah, blah, blah with like success in the first year of college. And then that correlates with it. And, like these kinds of chains of causality that look really impressive and impenetrable. And I think just kind of allow us to like skip past that intuitive and obvious understanding of like, okay, but really like, oh, okay, you've done all the, okay, that I get, look, there's lots of numbers and graphs and like statistically significant. As a researcher, I know how much people can manipulate data. And so And so I was like, wait, don't give up. Don't give up with your questions just because you see some really impressive looking numbers and graphs,
Mm.
right? And I think that's especially the case now when we see so much change. Just pick one piece, just from the influence of AI, right? Just from the influence of large language models and how that's disrupting various industries. And that's just the most recent of a range of things that continuously disrupt industries, right? My grandfather had one career his life, right? I'm already on three and
Mhm.
I'm in my mid 40s, right? Like my kids are they're gonna be, so how we can proceed with this high level of confidence of like, listen, here's the deal. Our children are our future. Also, school is about their future. Future. This is the most important thing. And of course, that's true and that is important, but it allows us to lie to ourselves about a couple things. One, it allows us to lie to ourselves and them that we have any idea what is actually going to be useful in their future
Mhm.
as a member of the workforce, as a citizen within a democracy, hopefully. Um, my fears being in the US right now, but a citizen within hopefully a democracy, as a parent, as a member of a community, right? Like we uh, don't know what it is that's going to be useful in terms of like really technical knowledge, right? Like used to be that being a software engineer, that's a really good guarantee. And now it's like, ooh, those look like some of the first jobs that there's significant decline in with these advances in AI as one example, right? So like we can't actually predict. So we're telling students a lie when we say these skills that you're specifically learning in algebra or in biology or whatever are going to be useful. They will be useful for you later. And it's like, really, with what confidence are we basing that? Why is storing information in our heads when we already know that computers are better at storing and retrieving information quickly than we are at this point right now, much less where they will be in the future? Why are we still prioritizing this, like storing information in our heads as if that is a crucial predictor of success and a really important skill that you're going to need in the future, right? So we're telling ourselves, in my opinion, a whole lie to make ourselves feel better that like, yes, this will be useful in your future. The second disservice we're doing when we put all that focus on like you just need to shut up, you need to shut up and be quiet and sit down and just listen and be ready to do this stuff later, is that we're also teaching them to devalue their present. And
Mhm.
then as adults, we all wander around being like, I'm so stressed out. Oh my gosh, let me go do a gratitude journal. Let me go do a meditation retreat. Let me go talk to a therapist and a life coach. Also, I need to change my diet. Also, like all these things to try to get us better at valuing our present moment so that we can actually experience our lives. And meanwhile, we're like selling this whole bill of goods to young people of like, yeah, but your present doesn't matter yet. Your present will matter once you are done with school and you are in a job. Then you should start paying attention to your present. Until then, no voice, no value, don't pay any attention to it whatsoever, and just be quiet and do whatever it is we're telling you, because it'll be useful later. Not really, we don't actually know, but hopefully it'll be useful later. So just take our word for it, right? And it's like teenagers are especially trained to have this really strong hypocrisy detector and bullshit detector, even higher, at the highest level, kind of at that point than it is before or after. So they can tell when we're full of shit, even if we are believing the lies that we're telling us, right? So, and like that also antagonizes this whole dynamic of like, you need to do this because it's going to be important. Why? Why? And like, I'm any parent who has, I'm imagine you can, right? It's like had some conversation with their teenager at some point where it's like, but why do I have to do this? And you're like, I don't want to say because I said so, because that's a thing that's like coming down from previous generations that I hated it, but it's all that I'm left with, right? It's like, oh man, it's so not going to work.
Yeah.
I'm doing it again. I'm going to blame my excitement for my long-windedness in answering every single question that you have posed to
All
me
right.
today.
Right. It's good. It's good. And I think like again, I've had this conversation with a few friends that have got parents that have got kids a lot older than mine, and I said like, why aren't schools or slash quote unquote the system teaching things that actually matter, right? Like the critical thinking, the how to triage a problem. You might not need the technical skills in that field, but how do you triage that problem? How do you the skill of zooming out to go, let me look at A, B, and C as before looking at D, E, and F. And like I don't think that's happening. And it's like it sounds bad to say it, but it's like we're creating It's like a factory, and we're just creating
Yeah.
little minions that are like do as I say type of thing, and I don't know if I think that both the system and I don't think teachers are equipped with or either not feel like they're not allowed to go to invite the challenge, right? And the teen wants
Yeah.
to challenge, right? And they're not invited to challenge. And I think it's not enough. And I think it's leading to, well, definitely in Australia, it's leading to young adults that don't challenge enough uh,
Yep.
and don't go, they go, oh, well, that's just the way it is, Janice. I'm like, no. I go, why? Like, it doesn't have to be.
Yeah.
And I'm like, why aren't we? I don't know why. I think it's a critical skill. And I think, yeah, I think people are going to get left behind. I think, as you said, like
Yeah.
with AI and technology, like rapidly going, like those, they're getting taught the skills that don't really matter. Uh,
Right. Right. And getting taught the mindsets that will get in the way of learning the skills that do at the same
mhm,
time. Right. And it's the combination that concerns me. It's basically we're saying your time is not valuable because we're wasting it on things that you will not actually use.
mhm,
Also, we're not really preparing you very well because we're having you unlearn some things that you'll need later because they're inconvenient for this highly structured environment, right? We're having you unlearn what later becomes in design speak problem identification skills, right? How
mhm,
do you discern what the problem is and dig down to the root cause? And it's like that's like native to a teenage brain because it basically means looking at questioning the assumptions of everything in front of you, going, no, but really, why? But really, why? Right. And those are not the students that get rewarded. The students who are doing that, who are leaning into that like rebellious and question raising tendency, are the ones that get labeled as a problem.
mhm,
And the ones who obediently take notes and listen and do whatever they're asked to, and then do extra beyond what they're asked to, are the ones that get rewarded, right? And then they land in their first job. And if they're anything like the dozens of young people that I've had the wonder of being able to manage when they first enter the workforce, they're so overwhelmed and feel slightly betrayed when they get into a workplace and they realize that somebody's not going to just tell them, here's all the things that you need to do. If you're talking about anything, if it's a call center job, yes, someone's going to tell you what to do. So I shouldn't say every workforce, but the workforces that they went to college to try to get into,
mhm,
those types of workplaces are not the type of place where you walk in and somebody is going to tell you what you need to do, what the end result should look like, how to solve the problem, right? Like they're going to say, here's the results we need, and you need to figure out what problems are getting in the way and how you're going to solve it, and bring me work product and seek feedback and all that kind of thing. And that's not, yeah, I basically took all my skills as a college professor and turned it around and used them more as a manager than
mhm.
I did even in my college classrooms, because I was like, oh, now you're actually now you're actually invested in learning because you've gotten here and you're like, oh shoot, how do I learn this stuff? This wasn't taught to me in high school or in college, and now it's apparently what I actually need to do in order to do well.
Yeah, and it's interesting, like the behaviors that are shut down at a high school level is what is sought after at in high level positions, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're high
Yeah.
level senior positions. They're looking for people to challenge the norm. They're not looking for yes people. They're looking
Yeah.
for the shakers and movers and go, hey, look, we want to innovate, we want to move fast, we want to, and they're not, they're shutting those students down, which is
Yeah.
interesting. It's counterintuitive. It's like, well, hold on. Workforce, businesses, society, politics, all the government needs those type of people and want them, but in
Yeah.
the formative stages, then there's going, no, 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 no. You need a don't move. If you're gonna, and it's interesting where they go, oh, you can't sit still. I'm like, that's okay. Like maybe teach them moving, or like let's do a walking class or something.
Right. Right.
It's not usually but you look at a high level executive that's in a board meeting that's doesn't sit down, just happy to walk around and writing on a whiteboard. Nothing said about
Right. Right.
nothing said about that. That person can't sit down either.
Right. Yeah. They absolutely can't sit still. And they have a walking desk for when they're on, video calls, and they and they go on walking meetings where they're doing them in person, right? And that's all praised. I think you're spot on. Some of the stories that were most exciting to me and gave me the most hope when I was talking with young people were they were talking about unusual and interesting programs that they're public, that they were really stepping outside of some of these norms. So one student, I want to make sure that I'm using his pseudonym. Eddie is his pseudonym. Okay. So Eddie was talking about this chance to be in this business class that he could opt into that was like kind of be an MOU with the local technical school, where the business class, they actually made a business. High schoolers made a business. They decided what business they were going to make. They decided to make it be a drinks truck business because that was something local to their area that like people liked getting a range of non-alcoholic drinks and special flavors about. So they made a drinks truck business. They went to warehouses to learn about manufacturing, about bag production, about like they learned about cost. They learned about marketing. They learned like all the things in order to make their drinks truck business. And then their kind of like final project was to actually have, they actually acquired a truck and got it permitted and everything else. And they set it up at a school event and sold drinks and like, had to man the concessions and all that kind of stuff, right? But he loved this whole experience because it was real, right? And one of the other things that this teacher had them doing was working, in addition to setting up their own business, was going into other local businesses who had some kind of problem they wanted to solve. Whether that was, we're trying to figure out how to market our such and such, or we're trying to figure out how to cut costs on, like whatever the problem was, and engaging the high schoolers in solving those problems with them, right? And actually leveraging exactly that capacity of like thinking outside the box and challenging normal assumptions and asking uncomfortable questions and to like use it, right? To use that energy instead of being like, no, 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 stop. Just stop. Like, don't use that energy here. Save it for a decade and then you can use it, right? Like,
Oh no.
yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
I'm curious to hear, do we're seeing a slight change, and are you guys seeing a change in the States with students post-COVID in terms of
So
engagement, in terms of dropout rates? So Australia's
yeah.
definitely seeing a higher level of disengagement and a high level of dropout. So like probably
Yeah.
10th grade, they're going into trade based, and Australia's pretty strong in trade. There's a lot of avenues for that. And however, it's interesting the schools and education that have been around, they talk about it as it's a different breed of student now. And curious to hear your thoughts on that. Is it happening there? Has it happened? Has there been a switch to any of that in terms of
Yeah.
modalities and all that over there?
Yeah. I would need to check specifically on the dropout rates and where they have been post-COVID. A lot of the tracking kind of dropped around COVID and the year after, and then it just sort of started to pick back up.
Mhm.
I think some of that was a little bit, some of it was like, oh, we don't have resources because we put all the resources towards making sure everybody got devices at home. And I think some of that was like, oh, I don't know if we really want to know the answer to these questions. I know one of the big things that's being talked about in US education is the much higher rates of chronic absenteeism
Mm.
post-COVID. That going from not just, like absent here and there, or what's the level of absences in any given day, but the percentage of students who are absent for, I'm forgetting now the exact definition. I believe it's over a dozen days of school has skyrocketed
Mm.
post-COVID. And there's all kinds of conversations about what do we do about that? How do we address that, right? You can't, if you are not here, you can't be learning. And some places are talking about it's like, well, this is a clear marker of disengagement,
Mm.
right? And I think that there's and like therefore we need to do things that are more engaging, right? So some places that conversation has started to happen. Not as many as I personally, selfishly, if I could wave my magic wand, would want that conversation to be happening. But yes, some places are starting to say, like, wait a second, this is an issue of engagement. How do we make school more engaging? Right. Some people that have been sharing the hypothesis of like, gee, lockdown displayed to students, and some of the students that I talk with talk about this in the book of like, I realized when I was at home that I could more easily learn the thing that I was supposed to be learning in bio class by finding a YouTube video from someone who did a much more exciting video about it than my teacher is trained to do, and then just learn it that way. And so why would I pay attention in school? It's boring and I can learn it somewhere else, right? And I was like, ooh, that puts a whole nother now as a teacher, you got to juggle all the standards, juggle all the classroom management, and also have a background as an entertainer, right? Like you, but it's like basically set the bar so much higher because of that bubble of time of being like, hey, I don't have to be here. What else? How else do I want to approach this if I don't have to be here? It sort of like broke the spell a little bit. Kind of, I think, comparable to the ways that it did in the workforce, where so many work was moved remote.
Mm.
And then, now I don't know if this is happening in Australia, but now in US, there's a lot of like return to work and return. And like everybody I know, I have been working remote for years before COVID.
Mm.
Everybody else I knew was not.
Mm.
Now, all these people I know who have been obliged by their companies to return to work from Return to Work initiative are deeply bitter about it,
Mm.
right? They're really resentful of their, and they didn't care. They didn't see any other option before, right? Like it was just like you go, you get up, you go to the office, that's it, you come home, right? Like, but once they saw that there was an option for a different kind of flexibility and work-life balance, now they're really resentful. And so I also do wonder if there's a comparable thing. Again, teenagers are not a separate species, right? Like
Mm.
comparable thing.
Mhm.
They're sent back into school that they don't find an environment they don't find environment. Adults are sent back into a workplace environment they don't find, and it seems a little bit like a scramble in both cases, right? Like a lot of workplaces are doing that because they're like, well, we realize that it's really important that people can connect with each other. And it's like, yeah, but you think you're going to foster connection by having a bunch of people who are irritated to be there? That's
Yeah. Yeah.
like,
It's interesting
yeah,
comparison that you made there because in Australia, it's definitely uh, it's a lot of it's gone to hybrid now. So some are still very much 100% remote, and it's like a lot of companies have said, "Look, we'll meet you in the middle. We'll meet you in the middle, and you know what? Can you come in 2 days a week?" Or
yeah,
there's for these main days where everyone's in, there is this connection. Great, and it's interesting that that's not offered to students, even though
yeah.
they've had like they had like here in Australia we had like nearly a year and a half of lockdowns on and off. Like they have a system already
Hmm.
to do that, and I know one school in Victoria in the state we're in has since that has offered a an online school. Never have they ever offered an online school. Uh,
Yeah,
and they said, look, it's you can come in, term out. And I think it's targeted to families that either travel a lot or want that continuous education. They go, you know what, you can do it online because we've proved to ourselves we can at a standard that we want to. But the next term, if you if you're in, you can come into class. And but
yeah,
it's interesting. It's not offered. I think it's that very again that different. It's they're treating him like a different species. Like, oh no, you
right.
don't have opinion, you don't have this, and they they fill in the blanks. I think with if you ask a student a question and they don't have an answer, they won't hold the silence, and eventually a teen's going to speak. You hold it long enough, they'll speak, and they don't. It's like they don't want to challenge, which is interesting, and I think it's discerning to hear that it's happening there too, but it's not surprising. And it's like, I got a magical question. You may not have an answer to it. And I've asked a lot of educators this question, and um, they've given me a not a great answer, like not a hopeful answer. And I was like, all right, okay, hold on. There has to be a way. Is there a way? And do you think it'll ever change?
A way to allow students to do something like the hybrid work model, or a way for school to actually be engaging and motivating overall.
Yeah, engaging, motivating overall, the giving like the system and the teachers the skills and tools and allowances to go, you know what, I'm gonna make it give a shit, right? I'm gonna make
Yeah.
this place interesting. I'm gonna make this place attractive. Like you look at adults that love what they do and go into work and go, hey, what do you like? Because I love it. I love the work. It means something to me. I have connection with the people there. I have connection with my clients. Um, like, do you think schools like for pre-college will ever get there?
Yeah. I don't know if they will. I think that they can. And that was actually the biggest surprise for me in interviewing students was realizing I came in with a background as an educator and a researcher prepared to be feeling pretty cynical about what I was going to learn. And I was surprised by how many students. I mean, there were some very devastating stories that students shared. This is not, I'm not going to claim that my book is like all roses and sunshine, but there were also these beautiful and amazing stories the students shared, like the one I was referencing with Eddie and his business teacher, other programs that students participated in, um, that really did, they were deeply meaningful, right? And whether it was at the level of an individual teacher just structuring their class differently, right? Or connecting with students outside of class time differently, or just seeing them, right? Like just seeing them as whole humans and caring about them as whole humans, right? Like, so there were some very powerful stories that students shared of things that made all the difference to them. One student, for instance, she's convinced that it kept her from dropping out. She had a very difficult social situation her final year of high school, and um, was like dropped from her entire friend group because she stood up to some people who were making a lot of very inappropriate jokes at the expense of another friend, and they all just ghosted her. And that's hard for anybody, but it's especially hard at a time period where like you are oriented to your peers, right? And to your social situation. And so she still had to see these people in school every day, and she just did not want to go. But she had this one teacher who she knew genuinely cared and was kind of like a grandfatherly figure to her. Like she really appreciated his wisdom. It was clear to her that he respected her, and she just felt like that she could talk to him and like benefit from his wisdom, and that he cared. He was an English teacher, that he like cared about her opinions as she wrote them in various papers and things, not just grading her work, but like genuinely interested in her opinions about the text they were reading and her opinions about the issues that they were talking about, and that he conveyed that in general to all the students in the class, not that he just singled that out to her. And she was like, that's what allowed me to keep going. That's the reason that I didn't drop out. I was absent too many days, and I realized that I can do this because he's going to be there, and I can connect with him if it gets too hard or I'm having a hard moment. I can pause between classes in his classroom, or I can stop by at the end of the day. And that connection was enough, right? And so I think it is possible. I think that it would be more possible if we put in structural changes that stopped incentivizing the wrong things, right? And that's going to take large scale advocacy. That's going to take parents demanding of school boards that what they measure and what they pay attention to and what they hold superintendents to account for is different than what it is now, right? So like if we really want it to be sustainable across the system, then it's going to take that level of local advocacy and involvement, and people paying attention. But in the meantime, I do still think it's possible for individual parents, teachers, and even students themselves to do things that make school more meaningful and engaging in the moment. And that's really what I put the book together for, is because whenever you're looking at a system issue, you go, okay, what are we going to do? Are we going to fix the system and kind of let the people who are currently suffering from that system still suffer? Or are we going to help the people who are suffering, but kind of like leave the system still broken? Or are we going to try to do both? Right. And like you have to pick at a certain point where your resources going to go. And for me, I was like, what I want to do first is help the people who are stuck in the system and they're in pain right now and thinking there's no hope for it to be any better. I just have to like get through and get out the other side, and then maybe there'll be hope. And to realize like, no, there are things you can do right now. There are things you can do right now to make it better. And ultimately, it would be a lot better if we would actually push for the system change as well.
Yeah, that's awesome. Oh, thank you. And if you were to create a bumper sticker, I know you're a fan of short form, concise, little kind of concise things. So that's why I thought I'd pose that out there. And again, like to summarize, and again, we went through a range of topics today. And if you were to put it on a bumper sticker, a takeaway for educators, for parents, for anyone, which I think we all do at some point, even if it's sliding door moments. have interactions with young people, right? To foster. I think we all play a part in it. It's not just the system, not just the school. It's sports coaches, it's parents, it's uncle and aunties. It's like, the Starbucks shop attendee kind of when the kids go into for their drinks after school. So what would you say a takeaway would you put on a sticker that to inspire to make them think a little bit?
Yeah, I know. You warned me this was going to be a question. I still didn't come up with anything. Yeah. It takes me days. I always quote this other writer who is famous for saying in a long letter, please forgive the length. I didn't have time to make it short. That's me in
Yeah.
a nutshell. I know this about me. So immediately I'm going like, well, can I just steal from somebody else? Like adapt, be the change you want to see in the world to be the motivation you want to see in the world, right? Like,
You were saying
um,
this is like like your growth. You want to, and you know what? This is me giving you the opportunity right now to grow in that space. So you're welcome.
in lifelong learning, is that you are on theme, on brand. Go you. I'm impressed. Um, okay, this feels hackneyed, but I would say that probably what I would go with is if you want it, model it, right? Like we tend to focus, especially as parents and educators, on young people's problems of like, what do we need to do about them or for them or to them or around them? Uh, but we hate it. If anybody treats us that way, right? So if you want to see change, model the way that you like it when people approach you with change, which is to collaborate, right? If you want to see change in their internal self-reflection and self-awareness, model, pause to assess your own motivation and model where you realize that you're falling short, right? So that's, if you want it, model it would probably be
I
my
like that.
very bad bumper sticker.
Oh, that's good. It's quite powerful. That's awesome. So, thank you so much for joining us today, and I hope you did because I thoroughly enjoyed the conversation. It's definitely an area that I am very passionate about. So, thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, it was awesome to talk to you. Anybody who wants to learn more, the book is available pretty much everywhere. Can you help me give a shit? Unlocking teen motivation in school and life. And my website's beccablock.com. So you can find out more in any of those places.
Right, and if where can our listeners get in contact with you through your website as well, or
Yeah,
what?
through the website, also on Instagram, at Can You Help Me Give a and but yeah, my website, or I have a podcast as well where I answer questions specifically from educators and parents about teen motivation, or anything around kind of youth thriving. So if people want to submit a question for the podcast and have it go into a future episode, they can also do that at canyouhelpmegive.com.
Awesome.
So
Awesome. We'll put that all in the show notes for our listeners. So again, thank you very much for a great conversation. And I definitely had a lot of takeaways and kind of inspired from it. So hopefully our listeners did too. So
thank you.
no worries. Thanks again, everyone. And thanks for listening. Until next time. See ya. Thanks for listening to another episode of Lifelong Learner. If you like this episode and want to know more and hear other episodes, head over to lifelonglearnerpodcast.com, where you can subscribe to our newsletter where you'll be the first to know when new podcast episodes come out. And if you want to say hello, tell us a joke or ask us a question, send us an email at hello@lifelonglearnerpodcast.com. Thanks again.